Dear students, here I am to discuss the orientation towards our test series. Our discussion will be divided into two parts. First part will be about the program of the test series, and the second part will be about the answer writing. So, let me give you the basic detail about the programs. Total number of the test is 10. Ancient, medieval, modern world, all the sections will be dealt twice. So 8 sectional tests are there and 2 sections will be covered in this manner ki first paper, second paper each. So total number of tests is 10. Number 2, the number of the questions will be as according to UPSC, with little bit difference in paper 1 and paper 2. Paper 1, paper 2 means first test and second test, because first test will deal with first part of ancient India up to Maurya, and the second rest part of the ancient India up to the end. In ancient India, we will give you 2 questions of mapping, in first question and in the fifth question. So, in totality, in all the 10 tests, you will get 5 tests regarding the mapping. Along with these 5 tests, we will provide you some additional information also about the mapping through a WhatsApp group of those students who are enrolled in this course. Every week we will give you some sites against which you can practice for your mapping section, because mapping is a secret of success in the paper 1. Now, third thing is this, okay, I want to give you little detail about the making of the questions, because that will give you a reasonable degree of confidence about your preparation. The questions will be framed according to our guesswork, because if I am conducting a test series, I have to go by that, because through a test series nobody can cover the whole of the syllabus. According to the trend of the question papers, I will decide what kind of questions we can expect for the coming year. Supposingly, you can take the example of ancient India. Every single year you will find that one question from the sources section is asked. The literary as well as the archaeological sources both are covered in last so many years. In archaeology, they have asked about the epigraphy, they have asked about the numismatics, even in particular about the coins of Kusan to understand their religion. Now I guess that monument can be made the base of the question. Same thing can be applied to the literary sources as well. They have asked about the foreign account, the Chinese account, the Arab travelers account. Al-Biruni is asked similarly in early medieval India as well. So now they can ask about some Greek source, particularly about Megasthenes. Maybe they can repeat a question about Pahian or Wensang. Maybe they can ask a question regarding the Arthashastra or regarding the role of regional languages, because Dharma Shastra, Shruti, Smriti literature is already asked. Mahakavya Puran is already asked. So on account of this thing, we can guess something. On account of the guesswork, the questions will be framed. Number 2, we will cover almost 50 authority books. So you don't have to worry about the coverage. Almost all the textbooks a student can even think of will be covered in your test paper. And of course, some of the books will be made the base, like Possible Sphere in Modern India. At least 20 questions I can show you how UPSC has asked from that same book. Or David Thompson for Modern World. So many questions are asked from that same book. Sometimes 2 or 3 questions from one single page. Supposingly, a question is asked that the role of philosophers in French Revolution is indirect and remote. Same line is there in David Thompson. Or the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen on 26th of August 1789 is the death certificate to the old regime. The sentence you can find in David Thompson. On account of this, we can guess that UPSC can ask you the question about the role of peasantry or the role of middle class dealt by David Thompson in his book. The peasants were revolting against the authority because they were having something to lose or something to gain. This is the line on account of which we can guess a question. So I will frame questions accordingly. David Thompson is a favorite historian of UPSC, I guess, like Percival Spear in Modern India. Or to some extent we can say during last 5-6 years I have found Upinder Singh has become the favorite of UPSC. So I'll cover so many questions from Upinder Singh along with Irfan Habib and Satish Chandra or Rijvi for medieval India. But these are the basic books. Along with these books, so many other research books will be covered. If I'll contact Nayan Jot Lahari for Harappa civilization or Nayan Jot Lahari for Asoka or Romila Thapar for the Maurya revisit, or I'll cover Bipin Chandra for imperialism and nationalism or Sumit Sarkar for Swadeshi movement. Of course, Shekhar Bandyopadhyay from policy to partition or Ishita Banerjee Dubey. So you can get some extra. Extra means what? Those points which are not generally covered by the historians whom we have considered the basic historians for our course. Those additional points will be taken from those books. So what is our planning? Covering the basic books thoroughly and taking the help of some additional books which are the high class research books considered among the historians throughout world. Now third thing, questions will be designed keeping the directive words in consideration. Directive words will be followed in every question, and directive words can be dealt only when you have the proper understanding about the historiography. So Historiography and directive words are in fact connected to each other. So every question will be covering this aspect as well. So 4 features of the questions you will get. Point number 1, we will cover our questions according to the guesswork. Number 2, detailed research work will be there. Number 3, directive words will be taken care. And number 4, of course, we will care about the historiography. Now, about the examining detailed ins and outs will be mentioned in your copy, and accordingly the marks will be given. I will personally examine certain copies, and in that line my research team will examine rest of the copies. They will examine my copy on account of the video I have prepared, in which answers are dealt. Along with that video, the model answer will be given in written as well, and they are experienced people working with me since so many years as well. So you don't have to worry about their quality. I will give you one additional thing, that is examining few copies thoroughly, word by word, line by line, and I will comment against every line if what is good or what is not good, what is expected, what is not expected. So that will give you some extra light, some extra insight to write the answer. Third thing is about answer. Answer discussion. Answer discussion will have 3 basic virtues. Number 1, to the point discussion will be there. So you will get an objective format of the answer. Number 2, historiography will be dealt in reasonable detail, because without historiography you cannot understand the rationality behind the question. And if you know the historiography, you can deal different questions as well from the same topic or from same subtopic. Maybe the same language is not repeated in the question paper, and you can have faith in UPSC's wisdom. They are so intelligent and smart and comprehensive in their coverage that it is a very rare chance that they will repeat the same word in their questions. But if you have discussed historiography, you can deal with the questions asked in different language. The third thing is about the craft of the answer writing. Answer is the basic thing, but developing the answer is a crafty one. So you have to understand the craft of the answer writing, how to begin, why these points are chosen to construct the answer, why these points are given the focus and some points are only mentioned, why this is the order in which I have presented the answer, why this is the way I have finished the answer. These are the points you will have to care, and I will deal. Along with that, so many other things will be dealt, like comparative study, the interdisciplinary approach, or the changes with continuity, and using the map or using the picture or using the modern terminology or using some other modern events to link with our past. These are the things on account of which you can improve some marks. So while I'll discuss the craft, these are the things I can focus. After this basic discussion about the test series, Now I will move towards the basic thing about the answer writing. Answer writing is all about 5 or 6 basic things. Number one, you have to understand that any individual should begin his or her writing with the basic question. The basic questions means where you need to know 5 6 points to construct an answer, like the Tadang of 6 limbs of Indian painting, or the basic salient features of Ajanta painting, or the basic teachings of Gautam Buddha or Mahavir Jain, or the salient features of Dhamma of Asoka, the basic essence of Sulahekul of Akbar, the reasons behind 1857. What are the reasons which caused it French Revolution or American Revolution? The contribution of Mahatma Gandhi in Indian national movement. These are the questions where you need only basic points to develop the answer. So begin your answer writing with this basic question. Because if you are not good against your basics, you can never develop your skill to write the questions of level 2. Because level 2 you can develop only when you can club the 2 or 3 points together. Supposingly, level 2 is asked about evaluate the role of Mahatma Gandhi in Indian national movement. This is the level 2. Level 2 can be asked this way, that how the teaching of Gautam Buddha is reflected in the painting of Ajanta. Here you will find that number 1, you will have to know the basics of Indian painting. Number 2, you have to know the basics of Gautam Buddha's teaching. And number 3, the application of ideas in the artistic function. So you have to be clear about the basic level or level 1 first. Unless or until you are prepared thoroughly about the level 1, you will be in a forced condition to do lots of application work in your examination hall, and that can make your answer very clumsy, very second grade, almost half or little bit more than half. So if you want to write a good answer, first you prepare the basic level. Now go to the second level. Second level means a question which has 3 specifications: clubbing, 2 or 3 points together, topics or subtopics together. Supposingly, a question is asked that if there would have been no French Revolution, then too the history of Europe would have been the same as we have witnessed. Since whole of the modernization of Europe is covered in the question, French Revolution is covered in the question, and if European history would have been the same, then certainly there would have been some regions. So while dealing with these regions, you will find that Renaissance or the Enlightenment or the French Revolution, American Revolution, the British Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Commercial Revolution, the Urban Revolution, all the things are covered. So while dealing one topic, you have to understand that that particular topic has a past and that particular topic has contributed for the next one, and you have to coordinate the interrelationship among the topics and understand the changes with continuity. Renaissance has begun the intellectual movement which has evolved in Enlightenment, and Enlightenment has contributed in French Revolution through the role of the philosophers. And later on, in 19th century, we find that so many countries in Europe came with this liberal ideology, liberal nationalism, democratic constitution, the constitutions which were having the provision of liberty, equality, rule of the law, and fundamental rights to the citizens, the independence of judiciary. These are the things which are recommended by the philosophers of Enlightenment, but their ideas were promoted by the revolutionary events. While French Revolution was not as successful as it was expected to be, but in the 19th century, the ideas of French Revolution re-emerged. So every time what we witness, history is evolving with the idea of changes and continuity. Now, we have to understand that if you want to understand the questions properly and construct the answer reasonably, you have to understand this thing in a comprehensive manner, because questions will be clubbed together. Number two, the questions will carry historiography. Historiography. What is the meaning of historiography is to be dealt little later. So right now, only one sentence. There are so many schools according to whom history is written, like Marxist, Nationalist, subaltern, or imperialist. Historians have written according to their own ideology. The ideology will affect the objectivity of historians, and they'll be prejudiced. According to their prejudice, the history is written. Unless or until you understand the prejudice of the historian, you cannot do the logical comment against a statement given in the question which belongs to a particular historian, a historian who belongs to a particular school. So what I wanted to say, deal with these questions, you have to understand the historiography properly. Later I'll deal with this issue in little detail. The third thing is about the directive words. Directive words like throw light, elucidate, comment, determine the role, evaluate, critically examine. These are the words which are called directive words, in which the examiner has given you a direction according to what you have to construct your answer. And you have to understand one thing also. Unless or until you understand the historiography properly, you cannot construct your answer according to the directive words. Because how can you comment against a particular statement if you have not been clear in your head about the prejudice of the historian? If a historian is writing with the prejudice of imperialist school or the nationalist school or the Marxist school or the subaltern school, he cannot give any reasonable comment against the statement. So, if you want to write your answer according to the directive words, you have to be clear about the ideology behind the history. So, ideology can be termed as prejudice as well, because every idea has its own ins and outs. Every idea has its own prefixed notion. That is called prejudice. So, the second level question carries three basic virtues: clubbing different topics and subtopics in one question. Number two, the questions are crafted according to the historiographical debate. And number three, questions will carry a directive word. Now, I will lead you towards the second point. Second point is about what is history. What is history? What is history means not academic interpretation. Here about the answer writing. History is a discipline of studies. History is a discipline of studies. History is a discipline of studies. Then how to maintain the discipline of history? You have to read history according to this discipline. FLC: fact, logic and conclusion. If you have not given a fact behind your conclusion, this is not history, this is hypothesis. Logic alone is not enough. So, authenticity of the conclusion comes on account of the facts given in support. Historians are supposed to speak the story hidden into the fact. Ideologically, the basic idea of history suggests that a historian should not speak his or her own mind. One has to be silent to listen the voice within the fact and analyze the story hidden into that fact on account of your logical ability, and then you give your word to reach to the conclusion. But little while earlier I discussed that no one can be free from his or her prejudice. Historians write history with his or her own prejudice. That's why it is said that while reading a history book, first you read one paragraph about the historian, then you will come to know about his or her prejudice. how history is written. In every book of history, you find two things: history plus prejudice. Every history book, every page, every paragraph contains two things: history along with prejudice. And if you want to comment against a sentence given in your question paper, you have to understand the ideology on account of which the prejudice has developed. Here I am not discussing the prejudice and the ideology. I am just dealing with the basics of historiography, that every historian writes history along with his prejudice, because historian has rightly said that every history is a fluid prejudice. Every history is a fluid prejudice. Gandhi has rightly said that no one in this world is capable enough to write about a story similarly as it has happened, because no one can be free from his or her prejudice. Your prejudice uh, develops within you through your peer group, your school, your colleges, your teachers, your family, your religion, your caste, your nation, your age, your experience, your circumstances. So many things are there to influence you, on account of which you develop your like and dislike. You develop your idea on account of which you want to change the world. You want to change the world, and in that direction you will find that you are like a Marxist, or you are like a nationalist, or you are like a subaltern. So what I wanted to tell you, that this discipline can be understood properly only when you understand, number one, history can be dealt in this fashion: fact, logic, conclusion. Number two, ideal of history is this, that a historian should speak about the fact and the story hidden into the fact. He or she should be absolutely free from the prejudice, but in practice nobody can be free from the prejudice. So then what kind of book you read? Any history book has two things: one aspect is about history and another aspect is about prejudice. Now you can understand the nature of the humanity. Let me go little further. Fact, logic, conclusion. Fact is the authenticity of your story, and the fact gets authenticity on account of the sources. So while writing something about history, you take care that if possible you should mention the sources on account of which you have received those facts, on account of which you have developed your story. Number two, I told you about the schools of thought, like imperialist or nationalist or Marxist or subaltern. You take the questions. UPSC has asked you the Treaty of Versailles contained the seeds of future conflicts. Means how the Second World War happened. historian is telling you that the seeds of the World War II was lying in the Treaty of Versailles. But this is not history. This history is wrote by a historian. Don't consider it like gospel truth. In humanity, gospel truth is not possible. Nobody enjoys the luxury to speak the gospel, the final truth. Same UPSC has asked another question. In the long run, the Locarno was descriptive both to the Treaty of Versailles and the Covenant. Here what UPSC is telling you, that Locarno was an antithesis to the Treaty of Versailles. Means what? The Treaty of Versailles caused the World War II, but you cannot say that as the Treaty of Versailles happened, the World War II was inevitable. There was a chance to avert the course of history. That's why a historian named James Joll, who has written a magnum opus of modern world named European History since 1870. He has given a very remarkable conclusion regarding this, that 20 years between two world wars is like an opportunity lost. There was an opportunity. If they would have used it constructively, the World War II would have been avoided. You cannot say that if in 1919 there was a wrong treaty, the World War II was bound to happen. Future does not live in the captivity of the past. Worst wrongs can be amended and the worst result can be negated on account of the best effort. Right? Now, you take the another question. The connections between the philosopher's idea and the outbreak of French Revolution is somewhat remote and indirect. Here, the role of the philosopher is little bit negated. It is considered indirect and remote. And now you take the another question. No event as encompassing as the French Revolution occurs in an intellectual vacuum. Here you will find that the revolution is designed by a philosophical understanding, because no event can be revolutionary in intent and content if there is no philosophical basis. So you find that same story of French Revolution and the same contribution of the philosophers are interpreted differently by different schools. And you have to understand that against the various opinions, you will have to develop your own rational decision making. And if you don't have that rational decision making, you cannot write a good answer. Let me take another case. Both freedom and partition were the work of Indian middle class. Both freedom and partition were the work of Indian middle class. This sentence belongs to a Marxist historian who says that India was made free by the middle class not to serve the interest of the people of India, but to serve their own interest. Marxists do not believe in nationalism. They believe that nation is an idea spread by the bourgeoisie to keep the people in illusion and to give them opportunity to suffice their interest swiftly without any protest. So what Marxists think about the nation will influence the Marxist historiography about Indian national movement. Those historians who belong to the Marxist school, they have written about the period, what we consider the period of Indian national movement, and they do not count Indian national movement as the national movement. They count it as a class movement of the middle class, means bourgeoisie, for the middle class and by the middle class. As far as the participation of the other classes is concerned, they call it the participation of the illusionary people. They were class in itself, but they were not class for itself. They were class in themselves, but they were not class for themselves. While the bourgeoisie, they are the class in itself and they are the class for itself. This is the division between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The proletariat people are generally misguided on account of sometimes religion, sometimes caste, sometimes nation, sometimes so many other things, while the bourgeoisie are class conscious people. And those class conscious people used the vast masses of the people to fight against the mighty British, to defeat them and to get the liberty to suffice their interest. That's why they raised a slogan after independence that भारत के वीर जवानों, मजदूरों और किसानों हम बर्बाद हो गए, झूठी अब्बा मचा दी कि हम आजाद हो गए. They consider the constitution itself is a fraud or cheating done against the common people of India, the peasants, the working people. So they will never ever consider any of the movement, whether it is the Swadeshi movement or the non-cooperation movement or the civil disobedience movement or the Quit India movement, as the national movement. They will always count it as the class movement. And that's why they are telling that India is partitioned because of communal politics, and communal politics could not be defeated because Indian so-called national politics was led by the bourgeoisie and they were not ready to fight against the communalism with proper vigor, because communalism would have been defeated only on account of one thing, and that is the class struggle. The class struggle was the only thing which was having the ability to defeat the communalism. But the bourgeoisie people were not ready to fight against the communalism because they were not ready to fight according to the idea of the class struggle, because they belong to the exploitative class. They want this exploitation to continue. How can they afford this class struggle? That's why India was partitioned. This is the idea propounded by a Marxist historian. Now you have to give your comment. If you do not understand this idea, how can you give your comment? And if you write anything, ABCD, you will not be able to get good marks. So what I wanted to tell you, that if you want to get good marks, you have to understand the ideology behind the history writing. Now you can take some other example. The bold knight Lenin, having rescued the fair maiden of the revolution from the evil Socrates, Kerensky, everyone lived happily hereafter. Now what you find in this question? The Marxist historian has given all the credit to Lenin to give the best of the days to the people in USSR and denounced Kerensky. So this eulogy is indicative towards Marxist historiography in favor of Lenin. Now you are clear that this sentence is framed by a Marxist historian, so you can give your comment if you are not a Marxist, if you understand the prejudice of Marxism, if you understand the limitations of the Marxist historiography, you can give your comment. A Marxist historian has given a judgment about the American Revolution. That American Revolution is an outcome of the conflict between the British mercantilism and American capitalism. British mercantilist interest and the American capitalist interest. This is one of the point of views. You can give your comment when you know that this is a Marxist historiography, and against the Marxist historiography, you are free to speak your mind. Unless or until you understand the involved historiography, you cannot write the answer. Percival Spear says that the Dayanand Saraswati could not influence the making of the modern India in any significant manner. This is an imperialist historiography, because imperialists believe that modern India is made by the contemporary energetic West through the frequent injection of the energetic contemporary West. The modern India is made, the new India is made. So, in the making of new India, the vast treasury of the past of India has not been significant. This is the observation of imperialist historiography. Now you are free to understand, now you are free to give your comment if you understand it. If you do not understand the prejudice of the historian, you can explain it positively. Whatever the sentence comes your way, you will explain it positively. But what UPSC is asking? Comment, examine, illustrate, determine the role, evaluate, critically examine. These are the directive words which can be dealt successfully only when you know the historiography. The historiography is an essential thing to deal with the UPSC questions. Otherwise, you keep approaching the dictionaries and keep remembering the meaning of illustrate, elucidate, examine. You are appearing in the examination of the highest class in India. You don't know the meaning of examination, you know. You don't know the meaning of discuss, you know, but you don't know how to discuss. Because a historian named Pigot came with the conclusion that Harappans were having an imperial political structure. But later on, a different historian named Fair Service, he came with the conclusion that no, Harappans were not having an imperial political structure. Later on, a historian named Ratnagar, he came with a different school, a different idea. Some other historians came with different ideas. Upinder Singh came with a different idea. You have to understand that there are so many ideas. But another thing you have to remember, that as a student preparing for civil services, not a student of history research, not student of PhD, not having done your post-graduation in history, you are not supposed to remember the names of historians. Dozens of the historians, sometimes hundreds of the historians, if you will cover the whole of the syllabus. You don't have to remember. Some students are showing their inclination to remember the names of the historians just because some topper has given this feedback. I am of the opinion, and I am of the firm opinion, and on account of my rational understanding and my vast experience, I am of the opinion that you don't have to remember the names of the historians. You have to understand only one thing. Every idea has some limitation, and So many historians have written about the same topic. So there are various point of view. What are the prominent point of view to understand? You have to understand that about the Harappan politics, there is an idea about imperial structure. Another idea is about there was no political structure. And the third idea is about proto-state political structure. These are the three political ideas about the political system of Harappan civilization. You don't have to remember the name of the historians, what Pigat was saying, what Fair Service is saying, what Ratnagar is saying. And you have to rationalize these ideas and develop your own rational decision. If you can develop a rational decision against the various opinions, you can get extraordinary marks in it. Now, take one another example. Hitler did not really want a world war. His intention was only a short war with Poland. Hitler did not really want a world war. This question is based upon the historical explanation given by Taylor, a renowned historian of Europe. He came with the conclusion that Germany was not, or Hitler was not, the reason behind the World War II. In fact, the British and French were wrong when they decided to attack Germany when Hitler attacked Poland. What is the idea of E.P.J. Taylor? E.P.J. Taylor was of the opinion that Hitler was having the same aspiration as Stresemann, the earlier head of the state of Germany, was having. They wanted to bring the Reichstag together, all the German speaking people together under one political umbrella. The difference between the two is that Stresemann wanted is gradually, through treaties, talks, peacefully, but Hitler was trying to get those things aggressively in a shorter span of time, if needed, even with the help of war. But when Hitler was attacking Poland, it was the last stage of his purpose to be realized. Almost all the areas were already brought under the umbrella of German state. So this Denging was the last point. Why did you attack here? You must have avoided. This is one understanding about the region of the World War II and about the role of Hitler, about the aspiration of Hitler. Another understanding about the aspiration of Hitler is different. They say that Hitler was aspiring to bring the world under the subjugation of Germany. Hitler was having a different design in his mind. His idea was continental. He wanted to subjugate the world and wanted to establish Germany, establish Germany as a superpower who can rule almost more than half of Europe directly and rest of the Europe indirectly. The same story is defined differently by different person, and you have to give your comment. How can you give your comment? This is not at all possible if you want to write the answer on account of narrating 4 or 5 points. You have read that point 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are responsible for the World War II or World War I or French Revolution or American Revolution or Russian Revolution. You cannot write the answer. You have to write the answer on account of the rational decision making against various opinions. I have given very few number of examples. Almost every question is designed accordingly. Little earlier I told you about the historiography of Marxism. That's why Sumit Sarkar, a great popular Marxist historian, writes about the Swadeshi movement, that by the end Swadeshi movement was a bourgeois movement. Why it was called bourgeois movement? Because Sumit Sarkar is a Marxist, and if a Marxist will write about any movement, they will count it bourgeois. Because if Marxists started counting it as a nationalist one, Marxism will collapse. So you have to understand the prejudice. If a right-winger nationalist historian will write, they will always cherish the great values of national movement, but they will appreciate 1857 in comparison to 1885. Because 1885 gives credit to Congress and right-wingers are against the Congress. So they will always give credit to 1857. And those historians who are the centrist nationalist, they will not give credit to 1857, they will give credit to 1885. They want to establish the credit of Congress. And to establish the credit of Congress, they are generally in tendency to overlook the contribution of the revolutionaries as well. While the centrist, while the right-winger nationalists will always give extraordinary credit to the revolutionaries, to the Indian National Army, to the Indian Naval Mutiny. That is why when Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji became Prime Minister, the UPSC has asked this question from Indian Naval Mutiny. When Narendra Modi ji became Prime Minister, UPSC has asked question from Indian Naval Mutiny. Same time, when Atal Bihari ji became the Prime Minister of India, UPSC has asked question about the role of Rana Pratap. Now you can expect about the role of Rana Pratap, Rani Durgavati, Hemchand, Guru Gobind Singh, and Banda Bahadur, Rudra Singh. You can expect questions from these people. These are the ideas behind this historiography. If you read 1942, a historian has written that Quit India movement was in fact a spontaneous movement. What do you mean by this spontaneity? A spontaneity is not a simple word. This idea of spontaneity is linked with the understanding of subalternism. If you understand the idea of subalternist, then you can deal with this statement. They will give you the same statement that 1857 revolt was spontaneous. They will give you the conclusion that the tribal rebellion was having a political conscience hidden behind. While the nationalists will not consider it with the political consciousness, while the Marxists have not given them that much credit. Certainly, imperialists will always discredit them. Imperialists will tell you that Britishers conquered India in the state of absent-mindedness. Britishers were not having any purpose, neither any strategy to conquer India. They won India in the state of absent-mindedness. And if you write the nationalist historiography, you will find that the Britishers were having purpose, strategy, brutality, and they have crossed the river of the bloodshed. Then they could conquer India. So you have to understand the historiography. If you cannot understand, you cannot comment. Now I'll take you to some other points. History is a discipline of studies, I told you. Now this studies, FLC, role of sources, role of historiography. Now, changes with continuity, interdisciplinary approach, comparative understanding, and understanding economy, society, polity, culture, etc. Already we have discussed FLC and sources as well as role of historiography. So now let me discuss this thing. Changes with continuity. History is an endless process. It is going on, and every topic has its past and its contribution in the making of the future. So if you want to understand it properly, you have to understand it in its bigger potential ambit. If you do not understand the Mauryan art, you cannot understand the Mathura art. If you do not understand the Mathura art, you cannot understand the Sarnath art. And without understanding, you can remember by points, but you cannot understand the process. If you do not understand the Mauryan architecture, you cannot understand the architecture of Ellora. How the Ellora is the climax of the Mauryan architectural style. If you do not understand the Renaissance and Enlightenment and French Revolution and modern Europe in continuity, you cannot understand history properly. It does not mean that Renaissance is repeated in Enlightenment. Renaissance was the base behind the Enlightenment, and Enlightenment is one step ahead from Renaissance. And French Revolution is an applied event of that philosophy. American Revolution is an applied event of that philosophy. 1830 or 48 revolutions are the applied events of those philosophies. So you have to understand it in a gradual process. If you do not understand the gradual process, you cannot understand history. You have to write the idea of United Nations organization with the understanding of League of the Nations. To secure the peace collectively, world came to the conclusion that we have to make an institution like the League of the Nations. League of the Nations failed. So after the World War II, people repeated the same idea with different institutional basis. But the question arises, from where this idea of collective security of the peace has emerged. The idea of the collective security of the peace was first propounded by Kant or Rousseau through his idea of fraternity. French revolutionaries raised the slogan of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And on account of this slogan, we examine the success or the failure of French Revolution, and we say that French Revolution, at least on the front of fraternity, failed at least immediately. But later on, when world came with the idea of League of the Nations or the United Nations Organization, the idea of fraternity is succeeding. Here you will find that French Revolution is linked with the World War I and World War II, the League of the Nations and the United Nations Organization. You can coordinate one topic to the another, then you are a good student of history. If you can differentiate the Renaissance and Enlightenment, then you are good in comparative studies. So, linking one with the another is right, but with comparison. Then you can be rational and reasonable in your understanding. And if you are linking the idea of Enlightenment and French philosophers with the idea of Romanticism propounded by the German philosophers, you will find that they will give two forms of nations. French philosophy will give you liberal nationalism, and Romantic philosophy of Germany will give you Frenchy form of nationalism. And the examples are Italian unification and German unification. That's why Italian unification came on account of so many revolutionary events, while German unification came on account of 3 wars only. Later on, what we find that Germany moved towards Hitler, and the liberal nationalism can be manifested in America, Canada, England, France, so many other countries. This Frenchy form of nationalism, this aggressive form of nationalism, extremist form of nationalism is based upon the idea of Romanticism. So you have to understand Hegel, you have to link Hegel with Bismarck, you have to link Bismarck with Hitler, then you are understanding history properly. So keep this idea of changes with continuity in your mind and read the things with right angle. Now, after this changes in continuity, interdiscipline is necessary. To understand the interdiscipline, you have to understand this thing. As a student of history, what you read? As a student of history, you read in a particular time and a particular space, you read economy, society, polity, culture. These are the subjects. History itself is not a subject, it's a discipline of studies only. In history, you read society, culture, polity, economy in a particular age, in a particular space, with the angle of FLC. Facts give authenticity to your conclusion, and sources give authenticity to your fact. And you have to understand that idea of history is in fact of neutral writing, but in practice, neutral writing is impossible. The historiography begins and evolves. So, while reading about economy and society and polity and culture, you have to understand that if you do not know the polity, if you do not know the polity, how can you understand administration of Maurya or Gupta or Hers or Chola or Alauddin Khilji or Akbar or overall Mughal or British? You have to understand what to read in a topic called administrative system. You have to understand the basic issues of debate hidden into that topic. The idea of centralization, decentralization, idea of military state or civilian state, the idea of welfare state or a libertarian state, the idea of a bureaucratic state or the military state. So many issues are involved which can be dealt by the historians. The centralized state, the decentralized state, the fragmented state, segmentary state. So these are the basic ideas. If you have developed some understanding about this, you can write the answers with the help of very basic information. First, you know what to read in an administrative structure. If you have read that modern administrative structure was centralized, then you know one thing, that centralization is not a word can be defined objectively. It has to be defined relatively. Centralized against whom? Centralized against the Guptas. So Gupta administration is less centralized than the Mauryans. But the same Gupta administration is more centralized than the post-Gupta or the pre-Gupta. Pre-Gupta and post-Gupta administrations are not that much centralized as the Guptan administration was, and Gupta administration was not as much centralized as the Mauryan administration was, and Mauryan administration was not as centralized as the historians of early days have considered, like Romila Thapar or Bhandarkar or Mahamahopadhyay Prasad Sastri, even D.D. Kosambi, Ramchandra Sharma. They considered the Mauryan administration heavily centralized. But later on, Robert Fussman countered the idea, and he came with the idea of the decentralized Mauryan administration. After the counter posed by Robert Fussman, Romila Thapar came with a different book named Maurya Revisited, and in that book, Romila Thapar gave a different picture. That picture is not as centralized as she propounded earlier, but still that picture is giving the idea of more centralized than the Guptan administration. So what did you understand? Centralized state is not an idea you can understand in the vacuum. You have to understand it relatively. If you say that Indian constitution is federal, then this word federal is not enough in itself to give you an idea, to give you a picture. Indian constitution is less federal than American, less federal than the Australian, but more federal than many more. Indian constitution has given you at least a federal feature, federal structure. British political system is unitary. Indian government before this constitutional government was less federal. Before 1935, Indian system was not federal. In 1919 Act, Constitution says that center will share its power with states. But how many departments will be given to the state? It will be decided by the center. And if center thinks otherwise, they can take their power back. So it was not federal. It was having little intention to be federal, but it was not institutionally federal. 35 was to some extent institutionally federal, but still imperial interference was there. So Indian constitutional federalism is more federal than that of the 1935 Act. English system is unitary, while Australian and American system is more federal than Indian federal system. So you have to understand it in a comparative manner. Comparison brings clarity. Clarity keeps you clarity of mind. So you can write the answer, and sometimes even if comparative study is not required, not demanded, then too you can use this comparative study to get good marks. You take another example. Latin America, USA, and Australia. USA after independence came together and made a constitution to become one nation. 30 units came together. 13 units came together. Australia, 6 units came together. And Latin America, they thought to become one nation, but finding the disruptive tendencies and decentralizing tendencies, Latin American leader Simon Bolivar came with an idea that there should be an extremely powerful center to deal with the tendencies of deviations and disruptions. This approach of Simon Bolivar finally failed them. And a conqueror, hero who won the national movement against the Portuguese and Spanish, like a darling of the Latin American people, was forced to die like a fugitive, while the people in Latin America were revolting against Simon Bolivar. The hero died like a fugitive. And what happened in America? The 13 came together. 13 came together. How? Because they successfully dealt the aspirations of the regions. That's why they came with a federal structure in which the center was having very little power. Same thing happened in Australia. They followed the American footprint, and they are successful as nations. Latin America could not succeed in realizing its dream. USSR is disintegrated in 15 parts. Yugoslavia is disintegrated. So you have to understand history with the comparative glance. If you are not understanding it comparatively, you cannot understand it crystally. Because sometimes you do not have any objective parameter to understand anything. It was right or wrong. That's why you find that in India, government of India after independence decided that we will not be providing you the linguistic states, while during the national movement they were of the same opinion that we are ready to give you the linguistic states. That's why so many princely people came together to tie with the national movement. And after independence, if nationalist leaders denied giving them the linguistic state, they started revolting. They launched a vehement movement and vehement protested movement against Indian national government, particularly led by Jawaharlal Nehru in the time of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Why this thing is happening? Because Indian government was afraid that they can lose the grip on the regions, and the regions can take the regional political term, and this regionalization of the politics can lead India towards disintegration. This fear has developed in the mind of the leadership because India got partitioned on account of the communal politics. This communal emotional politics partitioned India. That's why they are now fearful that this another emotional politics based upon the language in the region can disintegrate India. That's why they are not at all interested. Jawaharlal Nehru was bargaining the time that please give us 25 years at least. We will do the same. Because in between we can make our foundation very strong to keep India intact. But those leaders who were aspiring for the linguistic state were not at all ready to give them time. And they fought vehemently. And who were fighting? Those who were the Congress leaders, those who fought the national movement with the help of Congress and in association with the Congress, like Potti Sri Ramalu, he was a Gandhian and he died. What happened later? Jawaharlal Nehru conceded. He accepted the demand to constitute the linguistic states on account of the Fazl Ali Commission's recommendation. And what happened? India got disintegrated? No, rather integration of India became stronger because the cause of the conflict is resolved. If you do not listen the voice of the people, it can cause the disintegration, because integration is not only possible on account of the institution or the constitution. In fact, it comes on account of the consent of the people. If the popular consent is there to remain along with you, nobody can disintegrate, nobody can partition. And if there is no popular consent to remain aligned with you, alone constitution and institution cannot keep you together. The Indian political leadership responded democratically with foresight, with insight. The same thing is asked in your question paper as well. So, what you are understanding? You are understanding that if you read any topic with comparative glance, your clarity will give you capacity to deal with so many complex things, and one idea can enlighten you to deal with the another topic, the second, the third, the fourth, right? If you are not knowing that what to write in culture, like Nagar style, the Dravir style, the Mathura, style, the Gandhar style, you cannot write the answer. Even if you are knowing the basics of the facts, you can write a good answer if you know that what are the basic points you have to cover while describing the Gandhar school of art, the Mathura school of art, or the Dravidian style of architecture, or the Nagar style of architecture. What was the base? What are the structures in the campus? What was the design of the Sanctus Sanctorum? What was the design of the Sikhar? What about the circumference? If you are dealing with these 5-6 points, who were the patrons? What about the sculpture? What was the role of the temple in that society, in that economy? If you are dealing with these 6-7 points, you are comfortable enough to deal with the answer. And if you are not knowing those 5-6 points, you have to deal. You cannot write about Mathura or Gandhar or the Nagar Shaili or the Dravidian Shaili while you are knowing lots of facts. Knowing the facts is not enough. If you have so many stones but you don't have the thread, how can you make a garland? So many flowers, you don't have the thread, how can you make a garland? If you want to make a garland, you have to have a thread. That is the idea of institutions. That is the idea of criteria. That is the idea of system. You know the system, you know the criteria. If you are asked that, give a comment against the statement that 1857 revolt was the first nationalist war of independence. First nationalist war of independence. How can you deal? If you do not understand that on account of what you can say that some revolt is nationalist or not. I give you 1000 example of the events regarding 1857. Then too you are not able to decide that this revolt was nationalist or not if you do not understand the criteria on account of which you can decide that it was nationalist or not. If you are not understanding that on account of which you can decide that it was a war of independence or not. War of independence is a technical terminology. You have to find that during those events, are there some events on account of which you can say that this revolt was having the respect to the idea of liberty of individuals, the idea to promote liberalism in future, democracy in future. Then you can find few facts, and those few facts are enough to make you capacitate to craft the story. So here I will give you the understanding of first nationalist war of independence. First nationalist war of independence. What do you mean by this first? Veer Damodar Savarkar said that 1857 is a first revolt of its kind which possesses certain extraordinary virtues. What are the virtues? Nationalist characteristic and the characteristic of war of independence. While other revolts against British government before 1857 were not containing these virtues. So 1857 is first of its kind. And Ramesan Majumdar came with a diagonally opposite opinion that it was neither first nor nationalist and not at all a war of independence. Why? He says that this revolt was not containing the virtue of nationalist one, not containing the virtue of war of independence. So how can you consider it as the first one? First because containing these virtues, not first because not containing these virtues. Quite easy. And I have found hundreds of students wondering, finding the answer of this very easy question, and they started reading one more book, one more book, one more book. You keep reading books behind books, books behind books, but the answer is quite easy. You develop the understanding of the criteria to decide what is nationalist, what is not a nationalist. You find the question asked last year that Tipu Sultan was trying to build in Mysore a strong centralized and militarized state with ambitions territorial design. Tipu Sultan was trying to build in Mysore a strong centralized and militarized state. So here I will discuss only those terms, centralized and militarized. If you do not understand the meaning of the centralized, you cannot deal. But if you have understood the meaning of centralized during Maurya, you can deal even during Mysore. And if you have developed understanding about the militarized state during Kushan or during Delhi Sultanate or during Mughal, you can deal here in case of Tipu Sultan as well. Militarized does not mean big military. Militarized state does not mean rich in armament, because America has the biggest military power in the world. They are number one in military, number one in navy, number one in air force, number one in nuclear force. Their total expenditure on military is more than the grand total of the second to 13 countries in together. Second to 13 countries together are spending less money on military preparation than that of America. But still, America is not a militarized state. America is a civilian state. America is a democratic state. America is a constitutional state. America has a very powerful military. That's a different ballgame. Sasi Tharoor very humorously answered a question of Pakistani that Pakistan has a military and the military has adopted a state. While in India, we are a state and we have our military. So Pakistan is militarized. India is not militarized. Although Indian military is powerful than Pakistani military. So militarized means what? Mansabdari was militarized. Mughalian administration was militarized because the king was fighting even in the battlefield. He was leading the wars. And under him, the political and administrative structure was heavily militarized. Almost every individual, almost not 100%, almost every individual in the Mansabdari system was having two responsibilities. One is the departmental one and the another is additional one, that is military. You can find the same structure in Delhi Sultanate, military state. Same thing you will find here in Tipu Sultan. So the meaning of militarized you have to understand. You don't have to accumulate additional number of the facts to deal with the answer. You have to understand the meaning. In history, what you have to understand? You have to understand that it has to be dealt according to the FLC. Number two, you have to understand that you need to mention the forces. Number three, you have to understand history according to historiography. Number four, you have to understand history with comparative understanding, interdisciplinary approach, changes with continuity, and you have to understand history according to the understanding of the criteria on account of which you decide something right or wrong. You have to understand history according to the understanding of the institutions and the systems. If you want to deal with the painting, you have to understand that what are the basic points you have to cover in painting. If you deal with the architecture, you have to understand that what are the basic points you have to deal in the architecture. Then you will deal differently with different facts about the Dravidian or the Nagar style. You can deal differently with the Gandhar or Mathura. You have to understand what is the basics of administration. Then you can deal differently with different facts while dealing the Gupta or the Maurya or the Chola or the Harshvardhan or Delhi Sultanate or Mughal. You have to understand that what are the points you should cover while describing foreign trade. If you are knowing that these are the 5-6 points you have to cover in foreign trade, then you can deal it differently with different facts while you are covering the trade of Harappan or the trade of post-Mauryan, the trade of Gupta or the trade of post-Gupta or the trade during Mughal. If you are knowing well that what are the points you have to cover while dealing with the common man's life, then you can deal it differently with different times. You have to know what are the points you have to cover while dealing with the condition of the woman. Then you can deal it differently with different facts during discussing different topics. But the structure will remain the same. And if you don't have the structure, facts will not work. If you want to deal history properly, you have to develop the understanding of criteria, the institutions, the systems. If you have a glass, you can contain the water and you can take it comfortably. If you don't have the container, how can you contain the content? Facts are the content. The understanding of the system, what are the points you have to cover while describing the common man's life? What are the points you have to cover while describing the nature of the state? What are the points you have to cover while describing the foreign trade? What are the points you have to cover while describing the condition of the woman? What are the points you have to cover during describing the painting or the architecture or the sculpture? What are the points you have to cover while describing about the literature? You cannot write answer even if you are having good amount of facts, because facts will be presented in a haphazardous manner. You will not be able to convert it into a story, while a good answer should be readable like a story and understandable like an idea. With these points, I'll conclude here. Although there are so many other points we can discuss, we'll keep discussing these points in our different classes, during different test discussions, during different questions discussion. Now, I wish you a very bright future, with this promise that if you come here, I will try my level best to give you good questions and good answer writing, with a committed conviction that we will give our best whenever you need. Whenever you come forward, I'll be there to resolve your worries and queries. Thank you very much.
Hit the bell icon to never miss an update from LevelUp IAS. Make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.